So just to recap, functions are very helpful because it allows us to reuse code. So we saw before over here, we had to write a function for adding numbers, we would have it. And anytime we need to add numbers, we could just call this function and add different numbers. So we have print add -3 and 7 here. Come over here and I could change that to 11, 8. And I can use this function and keep reusing the code that was written here. A better example might be, let's suppose we're writing the software for the register at like McDonald's or some other fast food chain. And I'm going to just treat this as a very simple version of that because the actual implementation for one would be a lot more complicated. But let's just suppose we have a few steps that we have to get down here. So when you go to a register, they ask you what your order is, and the person's going to punch in your order. And so first thing we need to do is get input from the user. And that will be the order. The second thing we'll need to do is process the order. And so when you think about processing an order, it's going to send that information back to the cooks so the cooks can see what to make. And it's going to total out and get the values in terms of the money value that is required for the customer to pay in order for them to receive the order. And so processing the order has some sub-steps here. One sub-step is going to be get price of each item in order. And it's going to, after that, total the price. It means to add them all up. After that, it's going to apply sales tax. After it applies sales tax, it's going to print to the screen. And then it's also going to send order to cooks. Okay, and after that, the customer is going to pay for the meal. So after we process the order, the next step will be to pay. So we'll say payment process. And that will have its own set of steps. And then after that's done, the last thing is going to be to print receipt. So these are all the steps that have to happen for a register to process an order at a fast food chain. And you may not realize it, but all this is happening, and this happens for every customer that comes to the drive-thru or that comes through the building and comes in to eat in person. Okay, so we would want to write functions for all of these because we can't just write all of this in one continuous block of code and reuse it. We could do that, I guess, but it would be a lot less efficient. The code would look very confusing to read to other people, and there'd be no code reuse. So if we had to reuse a part of this, like, let's see here, get input from the user. Let's suppose that the get input from the user, we had to reuse that. Let's say that they placed their order, we processed it, but now we want to edit the order. And so there might be another step in here where we can edit the order. And then we have to get more input from the user. Well, if we don't use functions, we have to completely copy and paste or rewrite another input section into the code and have that freshly typed out. Whereas if we use functions, we could just take the code here in our function call and call that function later on. We need to do that. So let's go and write out some functions for each of these. So just as a reminder, the syntax is def for define. And if you're comfortable with functions already, feel free to skip this part here. I'm just going to be building out this example and how we would declare functions and call those functions inside each other for a more complicated example. But if you're good at functions, feel free to skip the rest of this video, move on to the next section. Okay, so we have def. We're going to say get input and going to pass this function. We're just going to pretend that it is getting input from the user, which is getting an order. Just like that. All right, so that's going to get input from the user. Then we want to process the order. So I'll declare a new function, process order. Inside of this, we're going to have other functions that are going to be called. So when we process an order, we want to get the price of each item in the order. That's the first thing. So we will take a new function and we'll just call it here. We'll define it in just a second. We'll say get prices. Call that in here. Say prices equals get prices.
Hey, this is Video Editing Austin here. I realized that I'm declaring a lot of functions here and calling functions that don't exist yet, and that might be a little confusing. Like here on line 8, I just said prices equals get prices. And you might be wondering, well, where is get prices? What is that? That's not been defined yet. And I'll be explaining more about this later, so just bear with me as I start putting in random functions everywhere. Just remember that whenever I call a function that does not exist, just hang on a second because I'm about to define those in a minute. I'm just like kind of sketching out the logic of the process order, and then I'll fill in the gaps, like what exactly get prices will do later. And I'm going to be talking about responsibility later on. Like get prices, its responsibility to get the price, and process order doesn't care how it does it, just that it gets done. Anyway, back to the video.
And you can just assume that this here prices is a list of prices. We don't know how long it is. We just know that get prices will return a list of all the prices for each item in the order. And so we might pass in order as a parameter, order as a parameter here. And this get input, let's just say that order equals input. We will return the order. And after we get the prices, we're going to process and we're going to total the price. So we need to add all these values up. So we might have another function. It might be total price. We might pass in prices. We'll make a variable called total price. And I should say subtotal because this is the pre-tax price. So subtotal price equals the function called subtotal price, pass in prices. So we're going to pause here. We're going to go and define subtotal price and get prices. I'll move down here. I'll say def to define this function. The name is get prices, taken from right here where we called it. We're going to say it has a parameter of order. And that is just going to take in an order, and it's taken as a string. And so let's suppose that let's suppose that for this humorous example that we're at McDonald's, and for some reason McDonald's cashiers are very tech savvy, and so instead of pressing buttons, they're using a command line interface to do this. And so they might have inputted the string something like fries, Coke, and double cheese burger, just like that. Now notice how fries, Coke, and double cheeseburger are all separated by commas. For the rest of this implementation for get prices, we'll just put a little note in here and hand wave this away for now because I'm just describing functions. We don't have to actually do all this. I'm going to hand wave here. I'm going to say parse string into tokens. That's just saying split up this string after every comma. So fries is its own section, a token. Coke is a token. double cheeseburger as a token, and then return list of tokens. So we'll just say that we returned, I'm just going to say null here. Actually, not null. I'm going to say, I'll just say 0 for now. And let's just pretend that this get prices function goes through, splits up the string that the worker put in, or the sentence here, into 3 separate things: fries, Coke, double cheeseburger, and it returns that. Well, actually, we'll need some further logic here. Some further logic that translates a menu item to price. So let's say fries is worth $2.35. And so the translation step will say, I have fries, and I'm going to check my menu. Oh, it says $2.35 here. Take that and put it into a list. And then for Coke, let's say it's $2 for Coke. And so they add that as a separate item. So we have a list that has $2.35, and now we have as a second item on the list $2. And then for a double cheeseburger, let's just say that's like $4.78 or something for a double cheeseburger. It's probably more expensive in real life. And so the third item that's put into this list is not the word double cheeseburger, it's $4.78, the price. And at the end of this function, it returns the price. Okay, so we've defined our get prices function, and we have not implemented it in the code. We just kind of hand waved it and said the steps that you would do. And so here we have in process order, we got the prices, and now we need to get the subtotal. And that's just going to say, take the list of prices, add them all together. So I'll define a new function here. And then we'll say subtotal price. We passed in prices as a parameter, which is the list of all the prices of the order. And then we just return prices, and then we'll have to add all these up together. And so I'm actually going to say a for loop, so for I in range length of prices. This is going to step through each value in prices with I as our index. And so I'll say, yes, sum as well. Sum equals 0. I'll say sum is equal to itself plus prices at the index of I. At the end of this, we will return the sum. So that's how you might implement subtotal price. You're just adding up all the prices in the order with this for loop here. You're returning that result. So jumping back to line 24, subtotal price returns the subtotal. Now we need to apply taxes. So for that, we would define a new function. And I think you see the gist of what's happening here. Making these functions allows us to split up this long process of taking an order at McDonald's and splitting it up into small logical blocks. So the first logical block was getting the input, where the cashier types into the command line on this imaginary world where McDonald's uses the command line interface to make an order. They type into the command line the input, which is fries, Coke, double cheeseburger. So our code takes that in, and it says, all right, so fries, how much am I charging for that? And that's going to go check a database, or it's going to go check the program somewhere, and it's going to say, oh, fries is associated with this number, $2.35. So take $2.35, put that into a list. And then Coke is $2, put that in. Cheeseburger was like, I think it said $4.75 or something. And return all this list of prices. This is the list of all the prices for the individual menu items the customer ordered. And that block of code functions, and it returns the result, which is a list of prices. And an important thing to recognize here is that we don't really care. See here in the process order, we don't really care what get prices does so long as it gives us the correct result. We don't care how it does it, we just want the correct result. Same thing with subtotal price. Subtotal price, we don't care what the actual implementation is, we just want it to give us the correct subtotal if we give it the correct list of prices. And so process is assuming that get prices works correctly and subtotal price works correctly. And so will all these other sub-functions that we will declare inside there. And this is an illustration why functions are so important, because it makes it easier for us to take a problem and divide it into smaller steps and to solve those each individual smaller steps first. So input, get prices, subtotal price, and the next steps that we would solve in this example, if I was to do this whole example out, would be to, so we told the price to apply a sales tax. If it's 10%, you're going to multiply the subtotal price by 1.1 to get 10% more. And then they print it to the screen so the customer can see it. And then we should do this in a different order here. We shouldn't send it to the cooks yet. And then it's going to allow the customer to do payment processing. So they can give cash, they can put their card in, whatever. And the payment process will happen, and we'll assume it's successful. And if it is successful, send the order to the cooks to be completed. And then once that is successful, the order is sent to the cooks, we'll go ahead and print out the receipt for the customer to take with them. So they have their order number. They come claim their order, so they can take it back or whatever, whatever receipts are used for these days. It might be like a promotional offer on it or something. Okay, so that is a reminder of why functions are important to use, especially in the longer code. Over here where we've defined a function add, and we're adding A and B together and we're returning the result, we may not need to do that. We can just do that natively in the language here, A plus B. But when we're doing something more complicated, something that's applicable to real life, we want to use functions to divide the problem into smaller steps that we can solve piece by piece. That is the utility of functions. Okay, so that's it for this overview, and I'll catch you in the next one.